Section 31 of Coningsby, or the New Generation, by Benjamin Disraeli. This recording is in the public domain. Book 9, Chapter 4. Alone in his chambers, no longer under the sustaining influence of Sidonia's converse and counsel, the shades of night descending and bearing gloom to the gloomy, all the excitement of his spirit evaporated, the heart of Coningsby sank. All now depended on himself, and in that self he had no trust. Why should he succeed? Success was the most rare of results. Thousands fail, units triumph. And even success could only be conducted to him by the course of many years. His career, even if prosperous, was now to commence by the greatest sacrifice which the heart of man could be called upon to sustain. Upon the stern altar of his fortunes he must now immolate his first and enduring love. Before he had a perilous position to offer Edith. Now he had none. The future might then have aided them. There was no combination which could improve his present. Under any circumstances he must, after all his thoughts and studies, commence a new novitiate, and before he could enter the arena must pass years of silent and obscure preparation. 'Twas very bitter. He looked up, his eye caught that drawing of the towers of Hellingsley which she had given him in the days of their happy hearts. That was all that was to remain of their loves. He was to bear it to the future scene of his labours, to remind him through revolving years of toil and routine, that he too had had his romance, had roamed in fair gardens, and whispered in willing ears the secrets of his passion. That drawing was to become the altarpiece of his life. Coningsby passed an agitated night of broken sleep, waking often with the consciousness of having experienced some great misfortune, yet with an indefinite conception of its nature. He woke exhausted and dispirited. It was a gloomy day, a raw north easter blowing up the cloisters of the Albany, in which the fog was lingering, the newspaper on his breakfast table full of rumoured particulars of his grandfather's will, which had of course been duly digested by all who knew him. What a contrast to St. Geneviève! To the bright bracing morn of that merry Christmas! That radiant and cheerful scene, and those gracious and beaming personages, seemed another world and order of beings to the one he now inhabited, and the people with whom he must now commune. The Great Seal, indeed! It was the wild excitement of despair, the frenzied hope that blends inevitably with absolute ruin, that could alone have inspired such a hallucination. His unstrung heart deserted him. His energies could rally no more. He gave orders that he was at home to no one, and in his morning gown and slippers, with his feet resting on the fireplace, the once high-souled and noble-hearted Coningsby delivered himself up to despair. The day passed in a dark trance rather than a reverie. Nothing rose to his consciousness. He was like a particle of chaos at the best, a glimmering entity of some shadowy Hades. Towards evening the wind changed, the fog dispersed, there came a clear starry night, brisk and bright. Coningsby roused himself, dressed, and wrapping his cloak around him, sallied forth. Once more in the mighty streets, surrounded by millions, his petty griefs and personal fortunes assumed their proper position. Well had Sidonia taught him, view everything in its relation to the rest. 'Tis the secret of all wisdom. Here was the mightiest of modern cities, the rival even of the most celebrated of the ancient. Whether he inherited or forfeited fortunes, what was it to the passing throng? They would not share his splendour, or his luxury, or his comfort. But a word from his lip, a thought from his brain, expressed at the right time, at the right place, might turn their hearts, might influence their passions, might change their opinions, might affect their destiny. Nothing is great but the personal. As civilisation advances, the accidents of life become each day less important. The power of man, his greatness and his glory, depend on essential qualities. Brains every day become more precious than blood. You must give men new ideas, you must teach them new words, you must modify their manners, you must change their laws, you must root out prejudices, subvert convictions, if you wish to be great. Greatness no longer depends on rentals, the world is too rich, nor on pedigrees, the world is too knowing. The greatness of this city destroys my misery, said Coningsby, and my genius shall conquer its greatness. This conviction of power in the midst of despair was a revelation of intrinsic strength. It is indeed the test of a creative spirit. From that moment all petty fears for an ordinary future quitted him. He felt that he must be prepared for great sacrifices, for infinite suffering, that there must devolve on him a bitter inheritance of obscurity, struggle, envy and hatred, vulgar prejudice, base criticism, petty hostilities, but the dawn would break and the hour arrive when the welcome morning hymn of his success and his fame would sound and be re-echoed. He returned to his rooms, calm, resolute. He slept the deep sleep of a man void of anxiety, that has neither hope nor fear to haunt his visions, but is prepared to rise on the morrow collected for the great human struggle. And the morning came. Fresh, vigorous, not rash or precipitate, yet determined to lose no time in idle meditation, Coningsby, already resolved at once to quit his present residence, was projecting a visit to some legal quarter where he intended in future to reside, when his servant brought him a note. The handwriting was feminine. The note was from Flora. The contents were brief. She begged Mr. Coningsby with great earnestness to do her the honour and the kindness of calling on her at his earliest convenience at the hotel in Brook Street where she now resided. It was an interview which Coningsby would rather have avoided, yet it seemed to him, after a moment's reflection, neither just, nor kind, nor manly to refuse her request. Flora had not injured him. She was, after all, his kin. Was it for a moment to be supposed that he was envious of her lot? He replied, therefore, that in an hour he would wait upon her. In an hour, then, two individuals are to be brought together whose first meeting was held under circumstances most strangely different. Then Coningsby was the patron, a generous and spontaneous one, of a being obscure, almost friendless, and sinking under bitter mortification. His favour could not be the less appreciated because he was the chosen relative of a powerful noble. That noble was no more. His vast inheritance had devolved on the disregarded, even despised actress, whose suffering emotions Coningsby had then soothed, and whose fortune had risen on the destruction of all his prospects and the baulk of all his aspirations. Flora was alone when Coningsby was ushered into the room. The extreme delicacy of her appearance was increased by her deep mourning, and seated in a cushioned chair, from which she seemed to rise with an effort, she certainly presented little of the character of a fortunate and prosperous heiress. 'You are very good to come to me,' she said, faintly smiling. Coningsby extended his hand to her affectionately, in which she placed her own, looking down much embarrassed. 'You have an agreeable situation here,' said Coningsby, trying to break the first awkwardness of their meeting. 'Yes, but I hope not to stop here long.' 'You are going abroad?' 'No, I hope never to leave England.' There was a slight pause, and then Flora sighed and said, 'I wish to speak to you on a subject that gives me pain, yet of which I must speak. You think I have injured you?' 'I am sure,' said Coningsby, in a tone of great kindness, 'that you could injure no one.' 'I have robbed you of your inheritance.' 'It was not mine by any right, legal or moral. There were others who might have urged an equal claim to it, and there are many who will now think that you might have preferred a superior one.' 'You had enemies. I was not one. They sought to benefit themselves by injuring you. They have not benefited themselves. Let them not say that they have at least injured you.' 'We will not care what they say,' said Coningsby. 'I can sustain my lot.' 'Would that I could mine!' said Flora. She sighed again with a downcast glance. Then looking up, embarrassed and blushing deeply, she added, "I wish to restore to you that fortune of which I have unconsciously and unwillingly deprived you." "The fortune is yours, dear Flora, by every right," said Coningsby, much moved, "and there is no one who wishes more fervently that it may contribute to your happiness than I do." "It is killing me," said Flora, mournfully. Then speaking with unusual animation, with a degree of excitement, she continued, "I must tell you what I feel. This fortune is yours. I am happy in the inheritance, if you generously receive it from me, because Providence has made me the means of baffling your enemies. I never thought to be so happy as I shall be, if you will generously accept this fortune, always intended for you. I have lived then for a purpose. I have not lived in vain. I have returned to you some service, however humble, for all your goodness to me in my unhappiness." "You are, as I have ever thought you, the kindest and most tender hearted of beings. But you misconceive our mutual positions, my gentle Flora. The custom of the world does not permit such acts to either of us as you contemplate. The fortune is yours. It is left you by one on whose affections you had the highest claim. I will not say that so large an inheritance does not bring with it an alarming responsibility, but you are not unequal to it. Have confidence in yourself. You have a good heart, you have good sense, you have a well-principled being. Your spirit will mount with your fortunes and blend with them. You will be happy." "And you?" "I shall soon learn to find content, if not happiness, from other sources," said Coningsby, "and mere riches, however vast, could at no time have secured my felicity." "But they may secure that which brings felicity," said Flora, speaking in a choking voice, and not meeting the glance of Coningsby. "You had some views in life which displease him who has done all this. They may be, they must be, affected by this fatal caprice. Speak to me, for I cannot speak, dear Mr. Coningsby. Do not let me believe that I, who would sacrifice my life for your happiness, am the cause of such calamities." "Whatever be my lot, I repeat I can sustain it," said Coningsby, with a cheek of scarlet. "Ah! he is angry with me," exclaimed Flora. "He is angry with me," and the tears stole down her pale cheek. "No, no, no, dear Flora. I have no other feelings to you than those of affection and respect," and Coningsby, much agitated, drew his chair nearer to her, and took her hand. "I am gratified by these kind wishes, though they are utterly impracticable. But they are the witnesses of your sweet disposition and your noble spirit. There never shall exist between us, under any circumstances, other feelings than those of kin and kindness." He rose as if to depart. When she saw that, she started, and seemed to summon all her energies. "You are going," she exclaimed, "and I have said nothing. I have said nothing, and I shall never see you again. Let me tell you what I mean. This fortune is yours. It must be yours. It is an arrow in my heart. Do not think I am speaking from a momentary impulse. I know myself. I have lived so much alone, I have had so little to deceive or to delude me, that I know myself. If you will not let me do justice, you declare my doom. I cannot live if my existence is the cause of all your prospects being blasted, and the sweetest dreams of your life being defeated. When I die, these riches will be yours, that you cannot prevent. Refuse my present offer, and you seal the fate of that unhappy Flora, whose fragile life has hung for years on the memory of your kindness." "You must not say these words, dear Flora. You must not indulge in these gloomy feelings. You must live, and you must live happily. You have every charm and virtue which should secure happiness. The duties and the affections of existence will fall to your lot. It is one that will always interest me, for I shall ever be your friend. You have conferred on me one of the most delightful of feelings, gratitude, and for that I bless you. I will soon see you again." Mournfully he bade her farewell. Chapter 5. About a week after this interview with Flora, as Coningsby one morning was about to sally forth from the Albany to visit some chambers in the Temple, to which his notice had been attracted, there was a loud ring, a bustle in the hall, and Henry Sydney and Buckhurst were ushered in. There never was such a cordial meeting, and yet the faces of his friends were serious. The truth is, the paragraphs in the newspapers had circulated in the country. They had written to Coningsby, and after a brief delay he had confirmed their worst apprehensions. Immediately they came up to town. Henry Sydney, a younger son, could offer little but sympathy, but he declared it was his intention also to study for the bar, so that they should not be divided. Buckhurst, after many embraces and some ordinary talk, took Coningsby aside and said, "My dear fellow, I have no objection to Henry Sydney hearing everything I say, but still these are subjects which men like to be discussed in private. Of course I expect you to share my fortune. There is enough for both. We will have an exact division." There was something in Buckhurst's fervent resolution very lovable and a little humorous, just enough to put one in good temper with human nature and life. If there were any fellow's fortune in the world that Coningsby would share, Buckhurst's would have had the preference; but while he pressed his hand, and with a glance in which a tear and a smile seemed to contend for mastery, he gently indicated why such arrangements were, with our present manners, impossible. "I see," said Buckhurst, after a moment's thought. "I quite agree with you. The thing cannot be done; and to tell you the truth, the fortune is a bore. What I vote that we three do at once is, to take plenty of ready money and enter the Austrian service. By Jove, it is the only thing to do." "There is something in that," said Coningsby. "In the meantime, suppose you two fellows walk with me to the Temple, for I have an appointment to look at some chambers." It was a fine day, and it was by no means a gloomy walk. Though the two friends had arrived full of indignation against Lord Monmouth, and miserable about their companion, once more in his society, and finding little difference in his carriage, they assumed unconsciously their habitual tone. As for Buckhurst, he was delighted with the Temple, which he visited for the first time. The name enchanted him. The tombs in the church convinced him that the Crusades were the only career. He would have himself become a law student if he might have prosecuted his studies in chain armour. The calmer Henry Sydney was consoled for the misfortunes of Coningsby by a fanciful project himself to pass a portion of his life amid these halls and courts, gardens and terraces, that maintain in the heart of a great city in the 19th century so much of the grave romance and picturesque decorum of our past manners. Henry Sydney was sanguine. He was reconciled to the disinheritance of Coningsby by the conviction that it was a providential dispensation to make him a Lord Chancellor. These faithful friends remained in town with Coningsby until he was established in Paper Buildings, and had become a pupil of a celebrated special pleader. They would have remained longer had not he himself suggested that it was better that they should part. It seemed a terrible catastrophe after all the visions of their boyish days, their college dreams, and their dazzling adventures in the world. "And this is the end of Coningsby, the brilliant Coningsby that we all loved, that was to be our leader," said Buckhurst to Lord Henry as they quitted him. "Well, come what may, life has lost something of its bloom." "The great thing now," said Lord Henry, "is to keep up the chain of our friendship. We must write to him very often, and contrive to be frequently together. It is dreadful to think that in the ways of life our hearts may become estranged. I never felt more wretched than I do at this moment, and yet I have faith that we shall not lose him." "Amen," said Buckhurst. "But I feel my plan about the Austrian service was, after all, the only thing. The Continent offers a career. He might have been Prime Minister; several strangers have been; and as for war, look at Brown and Laudon, and half a hundred others. I had a much better chance of being a Field Marshal than he has of being a Lord Chancellor." I feel quite convinced that Coningsby will be Lord Chancellor,' said Henry Sydney gravely. The change of life for Coningsby was a great social revolution. It was sudden and complete. Within a month after the death of his grandfather, his name had been erased from all his fashionable clubs, and his horses and carriages sold, and he had become a student of the Temple. He entirely devoted himself to his new pursuit. His being was completely absorbed in it. There was nothing to haunt his mind, no unexperienced scene or sensation of life to distract his intelligence. One sacred thought alone indeed there remained, shrined in the innermost sanctuary of his heart and consciousness. But it was a tradition, no longer a hope. The moment that he had fairly recovered from the first shock of his grandfather's will, had clearly ascertained the consequences to himself, and had resolved on the course to pursue, he had communicated unreservedly with Oswald Millbank, and had renounced those pretensions to the hand of his sister which it ill became the destitute to prefer. His letter was answered in person. Millbank met Henry Sydney and Buckhurst at the chambers of Coningsby. Once more they were all four together, but under what different circumstances, and with what different prospects from those which attended their separation at Eton! Alone with Coningsby, Millbank spoke to him things which letters could not convey. He bore to him all the sympathy and devotion of Edith, but they would not conceal from themselves that at this moment and in the present state of affairs all was hopeless. In no way did Coningsby ever permit himself to intimate to Oswald the cause of his disinheritance. He was of course silent on it to his other friends, as any communication of the kind must have touched on a subject that was consecrated in his inmost soul. Chapter 6